The road into Ravensmere was the kind that had not decided whether it was a road or a suggestion. I had ridden it in a plain wool cloak, no crest, no escort, just a sword at my hip and a story about being a patrol lieutenant checking grain reports from the eastern border posts. It was not entirely a lie. There were grain reports. Someone needed to check them. I had simply decided on a morning when the capital felt like a room that had forgotten to let in air that it would be me. My counsel did not know. My captain of guard, Fenric, knew only that I had ridden east and that he was to give me 3 days before raising any alarm. 3 days to move like a man and not a crown. Ravensmere was a village of perhaps 80 souls, stone buildings, a mill, a narrow river that went silver in autumn light, and an inn that also served, from what I had heard in the garrison reports, as the village's only healing post, its only meeting hall, and its only place to argue. The kind of village that solves its own problems because the capital is too far to care. I arrived at dusk, my horse tired, my side sore from where a low branch on the pine road had caught me harder than I'd let myself admit. I swung down at the inn's hitching post and stood a moment listening. The village smelled of pine resin and bread. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. 2 old men sat on a bench outside the mill, watching me the way men in small places watch strangers, without pretending not to. I gave them a nod. They gave me one back. Nobody asked my name. Inside the inn, a fire had been built too high for the room, either from generosity or from someone who'd grown up in colder places. 3 long tables, 2 of them occupied. A boy of perhaps 12 moving between them with bread and a careful expression. The woman behind the bar counter was not the innkeeper. I knew this the way you know certain things without being told. Something in the way she stood, one hand resting flat on the counter and the other sorting through a box of dried herbs, entirely present to the sorting and also entirely aware of everything else in the room. Not the passive awareness of a girl minding a counter, the awareness of someone responsible for the place. She was dark-haired, dressed plainly, a work dress the color of pine bark, sleeves rolled to the elbow, a cloth tucked at her belt. Not beautiful in the way my court would mean the word. Something more than that or beside it. The kind of face that was more useful than decorative and knew it and didn't mind. She looked up when I came in, not the flicker glance that checks and dismisses. She looked at me. "Patrol Lieutenant," she said. It was not a question. I had not said a word. "You have the posture," she said before I could react to that. "And you're riding alone, which means either you've been assigned something embarrassing or something routine. That road only connects to the garrison at Harrow and the grain posts east of the ridge, so I'd guess the grain reports. We've been sending ours for 2 months and getting no answer, so I assume someone finally had to come and actually look." "That's largely correct," I said. "Sit anywhere, I'll bring you food." She was already moving. "Are you injured?" "No." She glanced at the way I'd come through the door, the slight hitch in my movement I had been trying not to show, and said nothing to contradict me. Simply set a bowl of something on the nearest table and went back to her herbs. Her name, I learned over the course of the next hour, was Sable. Not from her, she did not introduce herself. From the boy, who called her by name twice while asking questions, and from an older woman who came in from the back room and said, "Sable, the Fennies family's youngest has a fever again," in the tone of someone delivering a report to a commander. Sable said, "Tell them I'll come at dawn unless it gets worse tonight," without pausing what she was doing. I ate. The food was good, a grain porridge with roasted roots, the kind of meal that costs nothing and has been done correctly. The fire was still too high. I found that I didn't mind it. After a time, she came and sat across from me. Not to be friendly, I understood immediately, to talk about the grain reports. "I'll give you the numbers in the morning," she said, "but you should understand that the problem isn't the harvest. The harvest was adequate. The problem is the road east of the old toll bridge. It washed out in the rain 6 weeks ago, and no one from the capital has sent a repair crew. Merchants won't risk their carts, which means the eastern farms can't move their grain to the mill, which means the mill can't fill its quota, which means our grain report looks like a failure when it's actually an infrastructure problem." I looked at her. "You've written this in the report." "3 times. She held my gaze with the steadiness of someone who has been patient a long time and is beginning to reach the floor of that patience. "The last one, I included a drawing of the bridge." I had not seen any report with a drawing of a bridge, which meant one of 2 things. Either the reports had not reached my administrators, or my administrators had set them aside as unimportant. The second possibility settled in my chest with the particular weight of things I had been avoiding knowing. "I'll look into the bridge," I said. She studied me. "You're a patrol lieutenant." "I have access to people who make decisions." Another pause, then, "All right." She stood, smoothing her apron. "Your room is the second on the left at the top of the stairs. The door sticks in cold weather. You have to lift the handle slightly when you turn it. There's a wash basin with water that was warm 3 hours ago and is now cold. If your horse needs anything beyond what the stable boy can do, tell me tonight, and I'll have someone from the village look at it." She walked away, not curtly, simply done with the conversation, moving to the next thing. I sat at the table a little longer, watching the fire. I had been treated as a soldier, spoken to as a man who had resources but not authority, given a room description that assumed I could manage basic instructions, informed of a problem and expected to do something about it, or not, as I was capable. No one in my capital had spoken to me that way in years. My wolf, and I should explain that I speak of my wolf as a thing apart from me, though it is not. It is the part of me that the bond lives in, the part that knows things before I do. My wolf had gone very, very quiet from the moment I walked into the inn. Not the quiet of sleep, the quiet of attention. I went upstairs, the door stuck. I lifted the handle slightly. The next day was the grain reports, as promised. Sable produced them from a wooden box behind the bar counter. 3 years of careful records in her own hand, clear and well organized, each entry dated, each anomaly noted in a margin. She walked me through them at the long table while the inn slowly woke around us, the boy bringing bread and the older woman, whose name turned out to be Hesta, and who was, I gathered, some combination of village elder and Sable's foster aunt, moving through the space with the efficiency of someone who had been running things alongside a younger person long enough that they had divided the kingdom between them. Ravensmere's kingdom was perhaps 3 streets and a mill. It was run as well as some territories I could name. "Where did you learn to keep records like this?" I asked. "My father kept the village accounts before he died," Sable said. "I helped him from the time I could write. When he was gone, it made sense for me to continue." "How old were you?" 14. She did not say it with any particular weight. It was simply a number, a fact. I thought about what I had been doing at 14. Training with my father's guard, learning the maps of the kingdom, being prepared to inherit something enormous. I had had a great many people around me at all times, preparing me for things. She had learned to keep the village accounts at 14, because there was no one else. The bridge had washed out, she explained, pointing to where she had noted it in the margin of the most recent entry, during the rains in the 7th month. The repair required 4 workers with the right materials and could be done in 3 days. The materials existed at the garrison at Harrow. Someone simply had to decide that this mattered. "Someone will," I said. She looked at me again with that measuring look. "You keep saying things like that." "Like what?" "Like someone will do something. You say it as though you have some confidence in it." "I do." "Based on what?" I considered how to answer this. "Experience," I said finally. She held the look for a moment longer, then returned to the records. Not convinced exactly, but willing to move forward. "In the afternoon, I walked the village, because if you are going to make a report, you should know what you're reporting about. Sable did not walk with me. She had other things to do. The boy, whose name was Tiv and who turned out to be something between an apprentice and an honorary nephew, offered to show me around. I accepted. The village was what it looked like. 80 people doing things that needed doing, in a place that asked a great deal and gave back a living if you worked for it. Tiv introduced me to the miller, the blacksmith, 2 families of farmers who came in from the eastern farms to bring what grain they'd managed to cart by hand over the washed-out bridge road, and an old woman named Preva who kept bees and had opinions about everything and expressed all of them immediately. "Is that the capital man?" Preva asked Tiv, looking at me. "He's from the garrison at Harrow," Tiv said loyally. "He's not," Preva said and went back inside. I decided I liked Preva. In the late afternoon, the skirmish happened. It was not a battle, nothing so organized. A group of 4 men, the kind that travels roads between villages looking for things to take, had followed the eastern farm families in. They'd miscalculated the village, which had more men in it than you'd expect at that hour, and when they found themselves surrounded by farmers with an assortment of tools, they tried to leave quickly. One of them, trying to leave quickly, put a knife into the nearest person blocking his path. I was the nearest person blocking his path. It was not a deep cut. My reaction was fast enough that it caught me across the side rather than anything vital. The 4 men ran. The village men were too sensible to chase them far into the pine road in fading light. I was left standing in the road with a hand pressed to my side, feeling the particular, irritating throb of an injury I did not want to admit to. "You're bleeding," said Tiv, with the frank observation of 12. "It's nothing. Sable will want to look at it." "It doesn't need." "She'll find out anyway," Tiv said, with the certainty of someone who had tried and failed to conceal things from her before. "She always does. It's easier to just go." The inn's back room served as the healing post, a clean, narrow space with good light from 2 oil lamps, a shelf of organized supplies, and a low table that had been worn smooth by years of being used for things that mattered. Sable had me sit and was unbuttoning my cloak before I'd fully settled. "I said it was nothing. You said your horse was fine at Harrow and it clearly needed a shoe reset," she said without looking up. "I've updated my estimates accordingly." I laughed. It surprised me. She looked up briefly at the sound of it, as though recalibrating slightly, then returned to the wound. Her hands were careful, not gentle in the way that means timid, but gentle in the way that means controlled. That means every movement is deliberate, and the deliberateness is a form of kindness. She cleaned it, assessed it, closed it with 2 stitches that she set quickly and well, and dressed it with something from her shelf that smelled of pine, and something else I didn't recognize, but that almost immediately reduced the throb. "You've done this often," I said. "We have no physician within 2 hours' ride," she said. "Someone had to learn." She was kneeling beside me, the lamp close, focused on the bandaging. The fire in the main room sent warmth through the doorway. The village outside had gone quiet with evening. I was aware, in a way that had nothing to do with the wound and everything to do with my wolf's continued state of absolute stillness, of the particular quality of the space. I had been in rooms with women before. Many rooms designed for the impression they would make. Rooms where every element had been considered for its effect on me. This was a room where everything had been considered for its effect on the person who needed to be treated. I had never, I realized, been in that kind of room before. Not as the person being treated. Sable sat back on her heels, checking her work, and that was when I saw it. On my inner wrist, just below where my sleeve had been pushed back, the skin had changed. A mark, silver pale, the shape of it not quite like anything else, a pattern that had no word in any language I knew except the one we use in Ethmark, the one we use only in the old texts about the bond. I knew it the moment I saw it. I had read those texts. I had believed them the way you believe things that will never happen to you. The mate mark. Sable looked at it too. She had very good eyes, she could not have missed it. "What is that?" she said. In 11 years of leading Ethmark, I had never been at a loss for what to say. I found that I was now. "I don't know," I said. It was the first lie I had told her. She looked at it a moment longer with curiosity, not alarm, the way she looked at things she hadn't encountered yet but intended to understand. Then she looked at me. Something in her expression was different just slightly, in a way I couldn't name. Then she stood, folded away her materials, and said, "The wound should hold. Change the dressing in the morning. If there's any heat in the skin by tomorrow night, come back and let me look." She walked out. I sat in the healing room alone for a moment, looking at the mark on my wrist. My wolf was no longer still. My wolf was awake in a way it had not been in my entire life, not restless, not pulling, but fully, completely present. As though it had been waiting for this room, this lamp, this woman with her careful hands, and had finally arrived. I had found my mate. She did not know what I was. I had perhaps 12 hours to decide what to do with those 2 facts. I did not sleep. I lay in the room with the sticking door and the cold wash basin, and thought about what I had been doing for the past 2 days, and what it meant that it had ended here. The grain reports were real. I had not invented them. The bridge was real. My administrators had set aside 3 reports from a village headwoman's daughter with a drawing of a washed-out bridge, and I had not known it, and that was a failure of something I needed to correct. That part of this was simple. The rest of it was not simple. She was not wolf blood. Ravensmere had no pack affiliation, no alpha, no standing in Eathmark's pack hierarchy. She was what the court would call a common village girl. No lineage, no house, no rank. I could anticipate with perfect clarity how my counsel would receive the news that I had found my fated mate while riding alone to look at grain reports, and that she was a village headwoman's daughter in a border settlement of 80 people with a washed-out bridge. I found that I did not care about any of that with any force whatsoever. What I cared about, and this surprised me, the specific shape of what I cared about was this. I had come to this village as a man, and she had treated me as one. Spoken plainly to me, argued with me about infrastructure, laughed briefly and quietly when I'd said something that warranted it, tended my wound with the same careful hands she'd use for anyone who came through her door. She had not tried to pass any test. There had been no test. There was simply a woman who ran an inn and a healing post in a border village, who kept good records, and who had 3 times sent a report about a bridge to administrators who did not answer. She did not know I was her mate. She did not know I was the Alpha King. She knew I was a patrol lieutenant who had some access to people who made decisions, and she had decided this was enough to be worth talking to. I thought about the capital. I thought about my court, where everyone knows what I am before they know anything else, and where knowing what I am arranges everything that follows, the angle of the bow, the careful words, the things not said. I thought about what it had felt like for 2 days not to have that arrangement. Then I got up before dawn and went down to the main room, because I was not a man who could stay in a room doing nothing when there was something to be decided. Sable was already up. She was at the counter with a candle and the village ledger, writing something. She looked up when I came down the stairs and said, "There's porridge," with the ease of someone who sees a person awake before dawn and finds it unremarkable. I sat. She brought porridge. "I have to leave today," I said. "Your business finished." "Enough of it. I need to return to the garrison and make a report." This was true in its way. She nodded, still writing. "The bridge will be repaired," I said. She looked up at that. "You seem very certain." "I am." Another of those pauses, the kind where she was deciding something about me. "All right," she said again. "I'll believe it when I see it, but I'll write it in the ledger that you said so with the date." "That's very practical." "Someone has to be." She returned to her writing. Then, "Your mark, is it gone?" I looked at my wrist. The mark was not gone. It was slightly clearer, if anything, the silver pale lines more defined in the candlelight. "No," I said. "You should look into it," she said. "It appeared suddenly. That's not nothing." "I know." She wrote something in the ledger. I watched the candle light move across her face. She was entirely absorbed in what she was doing, a woman doing the thing she does at dawn, in the place she is responsible for, with a stranger at her table who had told her the bridge would be fixed, and whom she decided to believe provisionally. I could not stay. I needed to return to the capital to convene my council to make certain decisions before I came back, and I would come back. I finished the porridge and stood. "Thank you," I said, "for the room and the treatment." She looked up. "You owe me 3 silver for the room and 1 for the stitching." I paid her. She accepted it with the same straightforward efficiency with which she'd accepted everything else. I went to collect my horse. At the door, I stopped. "Your records," I said. "The ones about the bridge, they were received, they were read. The failure was elsewhere." She looked at me for a long moment, meaning it wasn't that no one listened. It was that the wrong people were listening. I held her gaze. "The right people know now." She said nothing for a moment. Then, "That's the most forthright thing you've said since you arrived." "I'm trying something new," I said. I thought for just a moment that she might smile. She did not quite, but something in her expression settled, in the way that things settle when a person has been uncertain about something and then becomes less uncertain. I rode out of Ravensmere in the gray before sunrise, with the mate mark bright on my wrist and my wolf entirely, completely sure of where it belonged. I convened my council 3 days after my return to the capital. This took some explaining. My council was not accustomed to being convened without significant advance notice. The last time I had done so on short notice was a border incident in the 2nd year of my reign that had required immediate response. The 3 senior lords arrived in my council chamber with their advisors, and the brisk, slightly alarmed efficiency of men who expected bad news. I gave them the grain reports instead. All three of them in order with the margin notes and the drawing of the bridge. I watched their faces as they read. Lord Heron read quickly and set his copy down with the expression of a man doing rapid calculations about culpability. Lord Vesson read slowly and carefully and said nothing when he was finished. Lord Call read his twice. "The bridge," I said when they had all finished, "has been awaiting repair for 6 weeks. 3 reports were filed, 2 of which reached this council's administrative staff. Both were not escalated." I paused. "I want to understand how decisions are made about which reports are escalated." The explanation that followed took an hour and was largely unsatisfying, consisting mostly of the discovery that there was no clear process. That border village reports went through a general intake that was managed by a junior administrator who had been given no guidance about what constituted a priority, and that nobody had thought to look at this system because it had never produced a visible problem before. It had been producing invisible problems for some time, I suspected. "The bridge will be repaired within a fortnight," I said. "I am sending a crew from the Harrow garrison with full materials and authorization. I also want a review of the entire intake process for Eastern Border reports, to be complete within the month, with proposals for improvement." Heron and Vesson agreed immediately. Call asked one clarifying question, received an answer, and agreed. Then I told them about the mark. I showed them my wrist. The mark was clear in the council chamber's daylight silver pale, unmistakable to anyone who knew the old texts, which all 3 of them did. They were senior lords of Eathmark. They had been educated in the bond. The silence in the room was of a specific quality, not shocked exactly, but recalibrated. These were men who had been waiting, in the patient way of courtiers, for 12 years for their alpha king to find his mate. They had brought me candidates. They had arranged introductions. They had once, memorably, placed an extremely elegant and accomplished woman next to me at a feast, and arranged for us to be the last 2 people in the room, hoping proximity would do what their efforts had not. The bond had not found me in my own court. It had found me in an inn in a border village of 80 people, over a bowl of grain porridge, while a woman with careful hands sorted dried herbs behind a counter and looked at me like a man. "She is not wolf blood," I said. "She has no pack affiliation, no house, no rank in Eathmark's hierarchy." I watched their faces. "She is the daughter of a village headwoman, and she now runs the inn and the healing post in Ravensmere. She has been sending accurate reports to this council for 2 years. She has a very clear understanding of what matters and what does not." I paused. "She is my fated mate." The silence again. It was Vesson who spoke first. "The mate bond cannot be wrong," he said, in the tone of a man reciting something he has always believed and is now discovering he is glad he believed. "No," I agreed, "it cannot." Heron was doing his calculations again. I could see it in his face, the rapid assessment of what this meant for alliances, for the northern marriage negotiations that had been simmering for 3 years, for the various families who had hoped to produce a Luna from their own ranks. I watched him reach the floor of those calculations and find that he had arrived at the bond. The bond existed. Everything else rearranged around it. "When do we ride?" Cole asked. We rode 6 days later. I had not sent word to Ravensmere ahead of us. There were arguments in favor of this, courtesy, preparation, and I had weighed them against something I knew, which was that Sable was not a woman who needed time to prepare. She would be whatever she was when we arrived. That was the point. The repair crew had already been there and gone. A rider I'd sent ahead confirmed the bridge was done, the eastern road clear. I wanted to know if she had believed me, and I wanted to see her face when the answer became apparent. We rode 12, my captain of guard Fenric, 2 of the senior lords, their attendants, and my own personal escort, all in full regalia. It was a larger procession than Ravensmere had likely ever seen. I rode at the front. I was aware, riding down that road in autumn light, of a feeling that was unlike anything in my experience of 12 years as Alpha King. A clarity that had nothing to do with decisions or strategy. That was simply the clarity of knowing where you are going and why. The road into Ravensmere was still the kind that had not decided what it was. The pine trees were the same. The village smelled of bread and wood smoke in the cold air, and of something that might have been the repairs to the bridge, a lingering smell of fresh-cut timber. 2 old men sat on the bench outside the mill. They watched us arrive with an expression that had crossed from curiosity into something closer to astonishment. The village gathered. They could not help it. 12 riders in full kit do not arrive quietly in a place of 80 people. By the time I dismounted at the inn's hitching post, there were perhaps 30 villagers in the road, at a respectful and uncertain distance. Sable came out of the inn. She had been told by the sounds that something significant was happening, I suppose, and had come to see what it was. She saw the procession. She saw the regalia. She saw Fenric, who has the bearing of a man who has spent 20 years keeping an alpha king alive and looks it. Then she saw me. I watched the moment she understood. It was not dramatic, not what the songs make of it, not a gasp, not a change of color. It was more like something clicking into place behind her eyes, a series of rapid connections made by a mind that was very good at connecting things. The patrol lieutenant who had access to people who made decisions, who had been certain the bridge would be repaired, who had said the right people know now. She stood very still for a moment. Then she looked at me with the same directness she had used from the beginning, and I understood that what I had just seen was not shock but calculation, not fear, but the rapid assessment of a situation, the same way she had assessed the grain reports and the wound and the mark on my wrist. I walked toward her. The village was very quiet. Behind me, I heard Fenric holding the escort in place. I stopped a pace from her. She had not bowed. She would figure out, I suspected, at some point, that bowing was something that was generally expected. I found, standing in front of her in the road outside her inn, that I did not want to be the one to tell her. The bridge was repaired, I said. Yes, she said. I wrote it in the ledger with the date, and your name, the name you gave me, which I'm now understanding was not your name. My name is Kadrin, I said. Kadrin, Alpha King of Ethmark. She looked at me. Behind me, my lords and escort were watching. The village was watching. The 2 old men had gotten up from their bench. You came to look at grain reports, she said. I came to look at grain reports, I confirmed. And I found something considerably more significant. Her eyes dropped to my wrist briefly, then back to my face. The mark, she said. Yes. You knew what it was. Yes. That night in the healing room. Yes. She absorbed this. Her expression was not the expression of a woman being swept off her feet. I want to be clear about that, because this is my account, and I intend to give it accurately. It was the expression of a woman who has been given information she needs to process, and who is doing the processing in front of an audience she had not expected, and who is doing it with the same composure she brought to everything else. And what does it mean, she said carefully, that mark? What does it mean exactly for me? I had prepared for many versions of this conversation. I had not prepared for it to be this specific and practical. I found, unexpectedly, that I was grateful for it. It means, I said, that the bond, the fated mate bond that exists in our kind, that finds the one person a wolf is destined to, has named you. You are that person for me. I paused. It cannot be wrong, and it cannot be undone, and it requires nothing of you except, eventually, your willingness. Willingness, she repeated. I am not here to command you. I am here because the mark rose, and because I know what it means, and because... I stopped, started again. Because in 34 years, no one has spoken to me the way you did for 2 days. And I find I am not willing to leave that in Ravensmere. The village was very still. Even the pines at the edge of the road seemed still. I was aware of my lords behind me, of Fenric, of 30 pairs of eyes watching the Alpha King stand in a village road and say something he had never said to anyone. Sable looked at me for a long moment. You're certain, she said, about the bond. I have never been more certain of anything. Another pause. She glanced behind me, not at the lords particularly, but at the procession in general, taking it in, then back at me. I have questions, she said. A number of them. I'd expect nothing less. And I want them answered before I agree to anything. That is entirely reasonable. She looked at me one more time with that look. The one that was not deference and not defiance, and not performing anything at all, simply the direct regard of a person who sees things and says what she sees. All right, she said, come inside. I turned briefly to Fenric and gave him a look that meant, see to the horses and give the lords whatever they need, I'll be a while. Then I followed Sable into her inn. Behind us, I heard the village begin to murmur, quietly, the sound of 80 people absorbing something that would be talked about for a very long time. The questions took the better part of the afternoon. She asked them at the long table where I had sat the first night, with Hester occasionally moving through the background and Tiv very obviously trying not to be noticed while trying to hear everything. Sable asked about the bond, what it was, how it worked, what it meant in law, what it meant in practice, what it would require of her to go from where she was to wherever it was going. She asked with the same clarity and organization she brought to the grain records. I answered everything. Some of the answers were complicated. What it meant to be the mate of the Alpha King of Eathmark was not a small thing. There was a title, and responsibilities, and a court, and a hierarchy she had no existing place in. I did not minimize any of it. I have no wolf blood, she said. No. Your court will have views about that. Yes. And those views are irrelevant, I said, to the bond and to me. I paused. They will rearrange themselves. They always do in the face of facts. She looked at me with an expression that said she was not quite ready to take this on faith, but that she was writing it down internally for later assessment. I would not ask you to leave immediately, I said, or to leave as though you were being taken. I want you to come because you choose to. This village, this inn, they would be managed. The people here would not be abandoned, whatever is needed. She thought about this. Hester can run the inn. She's been running most of it for years without admitting it. And the village's healing post. There's a woman in the eastern farms who has most of the knowledge. She's been too shy to practice formally. She'd need the materials and the license to operate. She said this as though she had already, in some part of herself, been thinking about what leaving would require, as though she had gotten there ahead of me. Done, I said. She looked at me. You have a great deal of authority. Yes. You should probably use it more carefully. Probably, I agreed. I am told this regularly. The edge of her mouth shifted, not a smile quite close. I want to come to the capital before any decisions, she said, to see it. To understand what I'd be agreeing to. Yes. I want to bring Tiv. Of course. And I want the ledger records from the past 2 years formally acknowledged. The intake failure. I want it documented. I looked at her. She was negotiating conditions for agreeing to consider becoming the mate of the Alpha King of Eathmark, and she had included the village's administrative records in her conditions, because Ravensmere had sent 3 reports about a bridge and been ignored, and she was not willing to let that go without an accounting. I felt something in my chest that I would spend a long time afterward trying to put into words. The nearest I ever got was this. I had been a king for 12 years, and I had made decisions and issued orders and governed a territory, and I had believed that I was doing what needed to be done. And then I sat across from a woman at a long table in a border village and understood, in the way you understand things that arrive quietly and with total finality, that there was a kind of care for the rightness of things that I had not yet been. The ledger records will be formally received and acknowledged, I said. The failure documented. I will include it in my review of the intake process. She nodded, satisfied. I have one more question, she said. Ask it. The mark, she looked at my wrist, does it do anything? Beyond signifying the bond. In old tradition, it brightens when the mate is near. When the bond is acknowledged fully, the mark settles. I paused. When the bond is refused, over time it fades. Both partners, it's the same mark eventually on both. It takes time to appear on the second partner. She looked at her own wrist. Nothing there yet. Will it appear on me eventually? She asked. If you accept the bond, yes, in time. She considered this, and if I decide not to, then I accept that and the mark fades and you live your life. The bond doesn't hold by force. It never has. She was quiet for a moment, looking at her wrist. Then she looked at me. You're very calm about that possibility, she said. I am not, I said. I am choosing to be honest about it because you deserve honesty. They are not the same thing. The edge of her mouth shifted again. This time it was a smile, small, brief, the kind that arrives without permission. All right, she said for the 3rd time, and in this instance it had a different weight than the first 2. Not provisional agreement, something more settled. We sat at the table a little longer, while the autumn light moved through the inn windows, and the fire burned at its too high level, and Tiv, forgetting to be invisible, came and sat at the far end of the table and tried very hard to appear to be doing something other than listening. She came to the capital a week later, with Tiv and a single bag and the village ledger tucked under her arm, because there were still points she intended to raise about the intake review. I had given my court 3 days of notice. I had told them what was coming and who she was, and I had been clear, in the way I am clear about things when I mean them to be understood. She would be received with full courtesy. Full courtesy in my court means a specific thing, a standard that I enforced that morning before she arrived by having a conversation with Lord Harren that I will not detail here, but that resulted in his complete and immediate agreement. She arrived in the capital in a plain traveling cloak, Tiv at her shoulder looking at everything with the focused intensity of a 12-year-old who has never been outside a border village, and the ledger under her arm. My council received her in the main hall. I watched their faces as she walked in, the faces of men who had spent 12 years trying to find me a mate, whose various efforts had produced nothing, who were now looking at the patrol lieutenant's encounter at a border inn. Vessen I had been right about. He had believed in the bond, and when he believed in something he was consistent. He bowed with full courtesy and no apparent reservations. Harren had done his calculations and arrived, as I knew he would, at the bond is the bond. He bowed correctly. Call surprised me. He bowed and then said to Sable directly, I've read the grain records, the bridge report. A pause. The drawing of the bridge was very clear. Sable looked at him. Thank you, she said. It was. I thought watching this, that call was going to be all right. The weeks that followed were not without difficulty. I won't pretend otherwise, because this is my account and I am trying to give it honestly. There were lords who needed time. There were ladies of the court who had their own calculations to make about what a Luna from Ravensmere meant for the hierarchy they had spent years navigating. There were formal protocols that had to be adapted, because the existing ones assumed a mate from established pack lineage, and Sable fit none of the existing categories. She navigated all of it with the same composure she'd brought to the village. When she didn't know what was expected of her, she asked directly, and then did it with the correctness of someone who treats protocol as a form of information. When something seemed wrong to her, she said so, not combatively, simply as a fact that needed to be noted. She raised the intake review in formal session 3 weeks after her arrival, presenting the village's records to the full council with a calm specificity that left very little room for anything except agreement. The review was completed. The process was changed. She wrote this in the ledger and dated it, and I watched her do it and thought of what it would mean for the villages along Eathmark's border roads to have a Luna who kept a ledger. The mark appeared on her wrist in the 4th week. She came to find me when she noticed it, not alarmed, but with the focused curiosity she brought to things she intended to understand. We sat in the council chamber's window light while she looked at it, and I told her what I knew about how it grew, and what it meant that it had appeared, and what happened next. It doesn't hurt, she said. No, it shouldn't. It's the same shape as yours. She looked at my wrist, then at hers. Yes. She held her wrist in the light for a moment, studying it with the same attention she'd give a margin note that needed clarifying. Then she looked at me. You lied to me, she said, in the healing room when I asked what the mark was. Yes. Why? I thought about this honestly. Because I wasn't sure how to tell you the truth before you knew what I was. I was afraid it would be too large before you had anything to put it in. She was quiet for a moment, considering this. That's a reasonable concern, she said finally. It doesn't mean you were right. No, I agreed, it doesn't. Don't do that again, she said. I won't. She held my gaze for a moment, verifying this. Then she looked back at her wrist. All right, she said. The bonding ceremony was held in early winter, not the full court ceremony, not yet. That would come in the spring, when there had been more time and the court had finished its rearranging. This was the old ceremony, the one from the texts, the one that acknowledged the bond before the mark fully settled. Simple, witnessed by the council and Hester and Tiv, who stood through the whole thing with the expression of someone who had been present at something significant and was filing it carefully for the rest of his life. Sable stood beside me in the ceremony hall in a dress that was not her work dress and not a court gown, something she had chosen herself, something in the color of pine bark but finer, with a simplicity that was its own kind of dignity. She wore no ornament except the mark on her wrist, which had brightened in the hall's candlelight to something that was visible from across the room. She said her part of the old words in a clear voice, the way she said everything without performance, simply meaning them. Afterward, Tiv cried, quietly, in the way of someone who doesn't want to be caught doing it, and Hesta patted his shoulder with the efficiency of a woman who had been managing feelings around her for years. I walked with Sable out of the hall and into the corridor, and we stood for a moment in the quiet, the ceremony finished, the winter dark beyond the windows. She looked at me, I looked at her. "You're very satisfied with yourself," she said. "I am," I said. "I rode to look at grain reports and found my fated mate. Objectively, that's a remarkable outcome." The smile arrived, this time without the hesitation, full and brief and entirely hers, not performed for anyone, not shaped for the room. Just her face in the corridor light, finding something genuinely amusing. "The bridge is good," she said. "I had a report from Ravensmere. The eastern farms moved their full autumn harvest through it." "I know," I said. "I saw the report." "I may have asked to see it too," she said. "I know that as well." She looked at me for a moment longer, and I looked at her, and I thought about the road into Ravensmere that had not decided if it was a road or a suggestion, and the inn that smelled of pine resin, and the woman at the counter who had looked at me like a man and spoken to me like one and never, at any point, arranged herself to make an impression. She had not treated me like a king before she knew I was one. She had treated me like a person. It was not, I had come to understand, the same thing, and the difference was not small. "I should mention," I said, "that I intend to ride the eastern border roads in the spring." "Do you?" "There are 6 more villages like Ravensmere. I would like to look at their records." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll bring the ledger." I reached out and covered her hand where it rested at her side. The mark on my wrist steadied, settled, the way the old texts described, the way it does when the bond is acknowledged and the two people are where they are meant to be. She felt it. I could see that she did. Her hand turned under mine slightly to hold rather than be held. We stood in the corridor while the winter night gathered outside the windows of the capital, and the hall behind us slowly filled with the quiet sounds of a ceremony concluded, Hesta and Tiv, and the lords finding their way to the doors, the candles being tended, Eathmark's ordinary evening continuing as it would. She was not what any of them had expected when they imagined the Alpha King's mate. She was not wolf blood, not lineage, not a name from any of the northern houses. She was a woman who kept good records and spoke plainly and had sent 3 reports about a bridge before anyone with authority came to look. I had come to look, and she had spoken to me like a man, and the bond had decided the rest. The court would finish rearranging. The spring ceremony would come, and with it the formal recognition, and the lords would find their new positions in relation to the fact of her. And they would manage because facts, ultimately, are what they are and the bond is the bond. In the meantime, I stood in a corridor in winter with my mate's hand in mine, and thought about 6 more villages and their records, and a spring road east, and the particular quality of her attention when she was looking at something she intended to understand. It was, I thought, going to be a very good rain.